birth control.
Actually, birth control in the drinking water was what really set me off, because when we were doing college orientation in Florida, they told us that there's high levels in the drinking water, which I hadn't even thought of, and and it kind of blew my mind. So I started looking into that, and then I realized that's definitely an issue, because people pee it out. It doesn't break down. It's designed not to break down. And then it doesn't get filtered out through the municipal water system. So obviously, I bought a charcoal filter. It works. Charcoal filters out all of these artificial estrogen chemicals, in case you're wondering. But then I realized, well, there's also plastic chemicals. And there's all these other chemicals in the drinking water, in the oceans, on and on and on. And I started to see these common health problems, that they're all acting like estrogen and kind of disrupting our natural estrogen levels in our natural estrogen system. So I pieced it together, and that's kind of the book. I try to make it simple and kind of easy and fun for people to understand.
That's crazy that people who are taking birth control are peeing it out, and then it's not being filtered out of the water, treated out of the water, like the other things that are treated, like bacteria and viruses.
Correct, yeah.
Birth control is not being eliminated from the water, so then it's circulating through, and then we are drinking that. So you can use charcoal to filter that out.
Yeah, I used to use charcoal in the lab to remove hormones from things in experiments.
Yeah.
It works great. I mean, these estrogen chemicals and natural estrogen, they cling to it. So it just has that property. It can literally cling to 10,000 times its size or something. Like charcoal has this amazing property to cling to these hydrophobic chemicals, these fatty chemicals.
Yeah.
And there was this crazy study, you probably remember in the book. It was in the middle of nowhere in Switzerland.
Yeah.
And they found the fish were having these weird reproductive abnormalities. And sure enough, they found high levels of birth control in this mountainous
remote
lake in the middle of nowhere. And it was because this river was coming in from one of these bigger cities in Switzerland.
Yeah.
So the problem is more pervasive than people. I mean, you go out in the wilderness and you think you're drinking good, clean, fresh water. And you probably are in some cases.
Yeah.
But man, these things are pervasive.
Birth control is one that's obvious. We take that to impact our estrogen levels. It's pretty much the only one that's probably advertising itself as an estrogenic.
That's true. It's the only one that doctors are prescribing.
Yeah.
And they used to prescribe this one called DES, diethylstilbestrol. I didn't mention it much in my book because I focused on these ones that we're exposed to every day.
Yeah.
And I mean, I didn't focus on Agent Orange either, because hopefully you're not exposed to Agent Orange, but that disrupts your estrogen as well. It takes a long time to see those health problems as well. But diethylstilbestrol was prescribed to pregnant women. It's an estrogen mimicking hormone. And it helped with morning sickness because it kind of altered your natural level. Because when you're pregnant, you should know, in case you don't, your natural estrogen shoots way up. And that's natural. But there's some, you get morning sickness, right? You have certain side effects sometimes. And so they tampered with that with this prescription drug. And that's why I'm bringing it up, because birth control is prescribed, and this other one used to be prescribed, DES. And man, there were some major health problems, but it took generations for them to see it.
Okay.
So they were professionally prescribing it, telling everybody it's safe. And, it's sad. It's a sad story. I've met a ton of people that have been exposed to DES from their mothers taking it as prescriptions. And man, it's altered them in a lot of different ways. The best way to think about the health effects from these chemicals is to think about pregnancy. And like we talked about fat gains on Instagram a minute ago, and how these chemicals cause fat gains. And that's because when you're pregnant, again, natural estrogen shoots way up. So your body, when you're pregnant, historically, we haven't always had access to food, nutrition. And so your body stores more fat. Fat is the most efficient form of energy. So you store fat when you're pregnant, when your estrogen goes up. That's one of the things estrogen does. It tells your body to store fat. So, these artificial estrogen chemicals, they basically are telling your body the same thing. They're fooling your body into saying, oh, I'm pregnant. Hold on to that fat. Store more fat. Right? And what I call the estrogenic paradox is these chemicals store in the fat, but they also they store in the fat, and they tell your body to make more fat. Right? So it's hard because you can't get rid of them because they're storing in the fat. They stay in there. They like to sit in there, and they're telling your body to store more of it.
Mm.
So it's this vicious cycle of obesity. You get the infertility. You get depression because it acts on your brain.
Mm.
And, a lot of health problems, slow health problems.
Right.
It's not like an immediate headache. It's not an immediate bloating. Sometimes it is, right? But most of the time, it takes years, might even take generations to have these problems. That's how they discovered it. So it's called epigenetics. That's the scientific field. And that means the study of marks on top of your DNA. And so it's not the DNA itself that's altered through these estrogen chemicals, but it's these marks on top of the DNA. They get changed, and so they can get passed on. So you can have exposures to these chemicals, get these epigenetic marks changed, and then pass those health problems to your kids. And not only that, which is crazy, the kids can pass it to their kids. And they discovered it in fish with BPA exposures and birth control, I guess. They did a study with those two chemicals, and they found 1 day of exposure with mother fish. Right? They're not really mothers because they don't really nurture their babies, but whatever, mother fish. BPA and birth control, they both acted the same way, by the way. But so let's just use BPA. So they exposed the fish to BPA 1 day, just the mother, took the BPA out, fresh water, and then tracked the generations, and the fertility just went down and went down and went down in subsequent generations, which is crazy. And these are huge numbers of fish. It's not like they just studied 5. They were studying massive volumes of these things. So, it's a robust finding.
Yeah.
And since that study, they've followed it up with other studies with other chemicals. Same effect. They call it transgenerational inheritance. It's a huge concern because, we're studying how these coral reefs are dying off. We're studying how polar bears are becoming infertile. They're finding parabens in polar bears, which make the top 10 list. And, they did a study with 11 polar bears. They looked at sea otters. They looked at whales, all these endangered species. And they're finding high levels of these chemicals. And it's doing the same thing. It's causing future generations of those animals to become infertile. So
they're
there's a global effect. I know. And it's hard to reverse that stuff.